Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to welcome you all to the Informa Markets in India's digital platform under the umbrella of India Pharma eConnect. We are pleased to launch our first webinar on COVID-19 with the title Impact on Indian Pharma Industry. This webinar will deliberate on today's global pandemic situation and strategies adopted by various pharmaceutical segments to combat such crisis. Without any further ado, I'm delighted to invite the moderator for today's session, Anju Gangurde. Anju is Deputy Editor for Script and Pink Sheet in Informa English Publications. Anju has over 2 decades of experience in journalism, including stint in India's leading financial dailies based in Mumbai. She covers a range of topics across the pharma and biosimilar landscape. It's over to you, Anju, now.
Thanks, Rahul. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Informa Markets India and our India Pharma eConnect platform for our first webinar on COVID-19 and how it's impacting the Indian pharmaceutical industry and what's being done to tackle some of the issues. We have with us an esteemed panel of experts from across the pharma spectrum. But before I introduce my panelists, I'd like to set the context to today's discussion. The coronavirus pandemic, as we all know, has ravaged countries large and small across the world. It has also impacted businesses across sectors. In the pharmaceutical industry, we've seen supply chain disruption, issues around logistics, raw materials, and even employee movement. All of this has impacted business. So clearly, these are challenging times, and our panelists will address some of these concerns. But also, as the saying goes, adversity and our hardest times brings out the best in us and also some innovation. And as you all know, we have some repurposed potential treatments and some promising vaccines in the pipeline. Over the weekend, or rather just before it, the FDA has authorized emergency use authorization for remdesivir, the Gilead brand. So we will touch upon some of these aspects briefly as we go along. With that, let me introduce our speakers. Up first, we have Dr. Dinesh Dua, Chairman, Pharmexcel, and CEO and Director of Nectar Life Sciences. We're also happy to welcome Mr. Wilson D'Souza, Director, Sales and Marketing at Signet Excipients. We also have with us Mr. Shankar Gupta, President and COO of ACG Engineering. We're delighted to have with us Mr. Atish Majumdar, President of Mankind Pharma. And on the R&D front, we are happy to have with us Dr. Chetan Doshi, Chief Scientific Officer of USP Private Limited. So as you can see, we have a great panel with broad expertise on hand, and I'd urge all participants to make best use of the opportunity to ask your burning questions, which we will address towards the end of the session. With that, if I can get the session going, I'm going to start with Dr. Dua. Dr. Dua, let me begin with the long-standing concern on India's huge dependence on China for APIs and intermediates. Nearly 68% by value comes from there. If you can give us a sense of how things are poised, have supplies resumed, reached near normalcy? What's the bit on the pricing? Have they stabilized? And related to that, in March this year, the government unveiled a scheme for bulk drugs aimed at boosting both cluster development and incentivizing API production. So do you see all of this improving our competitiveness? Over to you, Dr. Dua.
Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. First of all, thanks to Anju and Informa for getting me here on this webinar. I understand the participation is very robust at about 800 plus. And I was just talking with Rahul Look, it looks like CPHI every year it keeps on increasing. So this is the biggest webinar that I'm attending as of now. It's been like coronavirus. There are two more viruses. One is the VC virus and the other one is the webinar virus. So they go along, but it's been phenomenally of great value, awesome value in terms of interacting through the digital facilitation. The ways of doing business in future is going to change dramatically, and I think webinar as well as the other ways of conferencing through VC, etc., will be the marquee event of the coronavirus infestation. I'm pretty nostalgic, from the time on that I started my career way back in 1979, passing out of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, as a young upstart MBA. I walk into an organization at that point in time, number one pharmaceutical company in the world from Germany, Herx Pharmaceuticals Limited. Some of you must be aware of it. It's currently repriced a long time back as Sanofi Aventis. When I got in there, the first job, ladies and gentlemen, which I was handed over, was to work out the costing methodology. And we never had computers at that point in time. We never had any digital access to anything, just a small notebook or large sheets and typewriters and what have you. And of course, phone, which was a distance away from you. So my first job, along with two other colleagues from IIM Ahmedabad, was to make sure to do the costing right, both in terms of formulations and API, which is the subject that I'm going to speak upon right now. Why am I nostalgic about it? Because at that time, this is in the 70s, right? It's 70s. India was absolute importer, like Pakistan, like a whole host of other African countries, of every molecule in the world, right? May it be formulation, may it be API. We were vulnerably dependent on the West, particularly. China did not figure anyway. India actually was ahead of China at that point in time. Now, lo and behold, from that time onwards, 41 years down the line, the same company that I worked for, where I was asked to keep as much profit back in the backyard to make sure that there's no double taxation. Today, we are at a situation where India is a robust, almost close to $50 billion industry, vertically divided into domestic and exports into about 25. We missed 25 because of the fact that there was a lockdown in the last week of March. Otherwise, we would have reached to about 22 at least for sure. So that being said, look at a paradigm change which has come about, ladies and gentlemen. From net importers of everything and anything, may it be the smallest of small vitamin formulation, to an antibiotic, to a gastrointestinal tract stuff, what have you, APIs galore, right, being converted into formulations by majority of the MNCs at that point in time, to a stage, and as an Indian, all of us must be proud. We are the pharmacy to the world. We control 30% of the generic space all over the world, 40% of the US generic space, worth about $110 billion, ladies and gentlemen. And we supply 206 countries out of 211 countries in the world. Even those 5 countries, Francophone countries, are supplied from Paris. So we supply to everybody in the world. What a shift it has come about. Thanks to our leadership and our bureaucracy at that point in time, in the Uruguay round of talks that we did not sign on the dotted line, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about the pharmaceutical market and India being pharmacy to the world. From then on, a clarion call by the then Prime Minister was given that the chemistry skills India should come to the fore, and it did. The academia and industry, entrepreneurially, some of the best entrepreneurs in the world. I mean, you've got the likes of them even currently today as living legends who set upon a task upon themselves to make sure that we evolve, develop through industry academia collaboration, which was hitherto never known, but the necessity and the urge to do well and become self-sufficient drove academia and industry together. And today we are where we are primarily because of that amalgam which happened. So let me now come back to a few statistics. Out of this 45 to 50 billion, it varies from place to place, but the FOMEXL figure is broadly around $45 billion, vertically divided into domestic and exports at about $22 billion each. In the API space, currently the valuation of the total manufacturing, imports, and exports all put together works out about $12 billion. Now, out of this $12 billion, there is $4 billion which is exported out, and $8 billion is consumed internally. Now, look at this: $8 billion worth of domestic consumption, and correspondingly, concurrently, $4 billion worth of exports. Now, what does it tell you? It tells you that our domestic market is hugely and humongously double the size of that of the API overseas. And let's look at this scenario. Our market in API has been growing at about 9% year on year. However, the imports have been growing at about 10%. And this importing figure of $4 billion is divided into China at about 70%, almost around $3.5 billion, and rest of it, which is the remaining 30%. Now, that remaining 30%, because of the current TRIPS situation that we are aligned to, that is the cutoff point between 1998, 31st December, and 1st of January 1999, permits you to coexist between the patented product and process, and the process patent prior to 31st of December 1998. So all of that import that you see of API predominantly consists of the patented molecules. The rest of it generic, and domestic part of it 70%. And if you were to differentiate further, statistically speaking, 90%, ladies and gentlemen, 90% of the domestic formulation is dependent vulnerably on the Chinese imports. Now, that's a very scary scenario. Over the last 1 decade, I, as the chairman of Excel, as well as various other hats that I wear in Confederation of Indian Industry, as chairman of Northern Life Sciences, and from our own company, Nectar Life Sciences, we are predominantly a $450 million company with close to about 90% coming from API. We are the biggest in the world in cephalosporins, which is very, very high tech, both oral and injectable, part of the domain, and antibiotics. But when you look at it, the government would listen to us, give us promises, tell us that, look, we want to become self-sufficient, but very precious little was done. Until this great, huge, tragic pandemic hit us, the wake-up call was not there. The wake-up call is there now, because what happened was earlier in 2008, as also during the Beijing Olympics, China was cleaned up by the government because that was a statutory requirement from both the sides, maybe the economic turn down or a Beijing Olympic requirement from International Olympic Confederation. They cleaned it up thoroughly and nicely. And then at that time, we realized suddenly that, look, we are so vulnerably dependent. There'll be a huge drug shortage. And from then on, the thoughts started emerging. But when Corona hit us and suddenly everything was stopped in terms of both imports and exports, it dawned on us that it's high time that we did some exercise in self-sufficiency of the APIs in the domestic market, which is double the size of $8 billion as compared to $4 billion. Now let's look at China. China was nothing as compared to us at a point in time that when we started emerging in APIs. We were the first country, ladies and gentlemen, very few of you know about it, to have moved into penicillin, the fermentation part of it. We were the first ones, right? But then we got whittled as we went along in the next 5 or 6 years. There were 5 companies, starting from Alembic, JK, and a whole host of other combinations, TGPL, TPGL, and so on and so forth. We started manufacturing excellent quality fermentation penicillin and vitamins as well. Hindustan Antibiotics Limited was one of the largest in Pimpri in Pune. So, but then Chinese government realized pretty early on in the 80s, mid 80s and thereabouts, that something needs to be done about APIs, because they had the raw materials, they had the requisite temperature in the provinces, and the government set about saying that, guys, to the industrialists, that we will give you land free, we'll give you water free, we'll give you electricity free, and that is 70% of the cost of the fermentation. You just go ahead and put on the entrepreneurship cap and take business forwards. And lo and behold, in about from the late 80s and truly speaking in 90s till now, that's 10 years plus 20 years and 30 years, every road on fermentation, every road from the innovator side in the West, US, Europe, Eastern Europe in particular, everything in fermentation has gone to China. There's nothing called fermentation in any part of the world, leave alone India. So that's the kind of excellence China brought about. And they did it in a graded manner. What did they do? They first give you the freebies. Then they start charging you slightly. And then they do massive tricks in WTO. I'm very familiar with that, right? What they do currently is, which is not known to a lot of people, but we've done our own exercise and we're working very closely with the government of India, my ministry, Ministry of Commerce, that look, they give 12% export subsidy, but they give it in an indirect manner. Supposing you have a textile company which is remotely related to the promoter, they'll give that they'll park that 12% there, and you will not see it in pharmaceuticals. Therefore, we as a domestic market, which is pretty lowly priced as compared to semi-regulated market, where we export $2.4 billion and $2.8 billion that we export to the regulated markets. In regulated markets, ladies and gentlemen, we have no competition from China. They cannot withstand our documentation. They cannot get themselves inspected. They have a problem with understanding of English and a whole host of others. That's why they've gone on a spree of hiring Indian intelligentsia to help them to, reach up to the regulated markets. But I think post COVID, it's going to
Uh,
be a tough call. Yeah, sure.
right. Yeah. So Dr.
Thank
Dua,
you.
so yeah, we are also, looking at the time. So that's a
Okay.
great roundup
I'll
of the
just,
history and the
I,
overall
I'll just,
backdrop. But if
I'll just
I
wind up
ask you
saying,
to just share your views quickly in the next just couple of minutes on the latest government incentives, so it gives our
okay.
participants a broad idea of how effective these are to make Indian API manufacturers competitive.
Okay, Anju, I'm very, very passionate about it. That's why I can go on and on and on, time permitting, but it doesn't matter. Within the time constraint, I'll answer your question that look, today we are in a flux situation thanks to only positive side of COVID, if I'm permitted to say, is that the government has woken up. They've proactively come forward. They very clearly stated that look, we will give you 3,000 crores, 1,000 crore each to the pharma parks. Chinese parks are huge. They are 10,000 acres or thereabouts, minimum sized. But here we can manage with 1,000 acres, not a problem. So they've already identified Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Badi in Himachal, which is a question mark in my considered view because they don't have the land. So maybe we're trying to get it in Punjab if we can. So that 3,000 crores is given there to the state government, and then the private sector can collaborate with the state government to make sure that in those parks, on a long-term basis, everything is provided under one roof. May it be the inputs, may it be the testing facilities, may it be the ETP, the effluent treatment facility, and transportation, everything, packaging as well. Now, outside of that, now this 1,000 crore is an institutional investment, and the private investors will have to put in their part of the money, and you move forward. That's a good step forward. But that's going to be a long-term measure for about 2 years minimum. Let's come to the short-term measures. Short-term measures are that the government says that here is a list of 53 KSMs and APIs. Look at this, pick on any one of these where we are 100% dependent on China, and make sure that you start manufacturing it in the next 6 months to a year time. KSM fermentation will take 2 years, but chemical APIs, we have fantastic excellence. We are making those APIs for the regulated market, but we can't afford to make it for domestic because the pricing is absolutely abrasive from China at 50% of the cost or at about less than variable cost in certain cases. So the government says from a zero level, if you go up to 100 rupees, say, for example, in the first year, we'll give you 20% discount or subsidy or incentive. Don't call it subsidy, incentive. It's an investment by the government into the private sector. So your cost is
Okay, so
80. Last one, that in case of capital, you will get subsidy at the rate of 12% every year for 8 years. So that's another incentive that you have. And overall, you'll become competitive. In addition to that, last but not the least, government says that for the sake of self-sufficiency, WTO permits you to impose duties, customs duty, anti-dumping duty, China to make sure that in case you're self-sufficient, adequate quantities are there, they will be imposed 30 to 40%. A lot of countries have done it, so can India. And that's the time we can revive ourselves in the short term for sure.
okay, thank you, Dr. Dua. That was really comprehensive, and it went from the history to the current situation to also the incentives. So probably just to break this session a bit, we have this is a good time to launch our first poll question for all participants. Please take a look at your screens. You have roughly 30 seconds to share your opinion and then take a look at which way the wind is blowing. Yes. So thank you for that. Let me now move on to Dr. Wilson D'Souza of Signet. Uh, D'Souza, along with APIs, excipients is another critical area for pharma, especially given the range of repurposed drugs and vaccines under development, and that excipients play a significant role to stabilize these during processing and storage. How has the pandemic impacted this segment? Are we seeing a boost in demand for functional excipients? And related to that, in terms of production, our manufacturers have to, have had reset production and Indian companies which are somewhat dependent on peers in Europe and US. How are you faring? If you can share your broad overview on this. Over to you, Mr. Wilson.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's nice to be on the digital platform. Thank you, Informa, for this. To answer your question, Anju, like in all sections, COVID-19 has disrupted the excipient segment as well because supply chain has been impacted. But when compared to the other segments, I would say the excipient segment is less affected. And one of the prime reason for this is majority of the leading excipient producers in the world are from the West. So the China shutdown has not impacted that much. Our over dependence of high quality excipients on China is far lesser compared to that. Secondly, also customers have their own safety stock points of 2 3 months. So the impact as such would come, or we would rather be able to see it maybe in the coming months or coming weeks. Like for example, take our company, Signet. When the lockdown started, the first initial few days were days of unpredictedness, but very quickly we got all our act together, took all the regulatory all the regulatory documentation that was required, and we are almost now at 75% of our operations, and in the next 1 week I would say we will be better. We'll be better at like 100%.
Okay. So what about the situation where some of the large manufacturers in the US and Europe, they've also been having to reset production, and Indian companies are dependent on some of these. Are we seeing some kind of a realignment there,
uh,
Mr. D'Souza? I think we're having a bit of a technical problem with Mr. D'Souza's line. Okay. Uh, okay. So while Mr. D'Souza gets back into sync, uh, let me just move on to Mr. Shankar Gupta of ACG. I'll get back to Mr. D'Souza in a bit. Mr. Gupta, now with manufacturing activities disrupted, how has ACG Engineering Solutions been impacted? I mean, are we looking at increased demand for technical support for pharmaceutical facilities? I know you have a huge number of machine installations across the industry, and is there a surge in demand for any advanced machinery, or then are we looking at a lull in the whole overall business? That's the first question, and just connected to that, ACG encouragingly recently indicated that production at all its factories is running absolutely fine and the supply chain is running smoothly. If you can share some insights on how some of the key measures you've taken to ensure such business continuity. Over to you, Mr. Gupta.
Mm, Thank you, Informa, first of all, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this distinguished panel, and thanks to all the panelists and the participants. So I'll answer the question in two parts. First is that on machines, what we see is that in three parts. What we see is that on the greenfield projects that were coming, whether the project was for serving the catering to the Indian market or for the American or the overseas market, there is a disruption in that. There is a challenge is that, and customers are postponing their requirement. If not, they're not canceling their requirement, but they're postponing. Part B is the existing projects, the projects which were going on. We are not seeing any change there. Most of the customers are carrying on with their existing projects. And part C, we are seeing an immediate opportunity coming. Maybe because of COVID-19, there are customers who are coming that we immediately require these machines. And they're normally fairly standard machine, not very sophisticated machines or high-end machines. This is part C. So part A, there is a postponement of existing projects. Part B, the existing projects are continuing, the greenfield projects are postponed. And part C, there's an immediate opportunity. Now, the sum of A plus B plus C is generally neutral to positive. I'm not seeing a negative trend. So that's on the machine side. On the services side, initial 1 to 2 weeks when this lockdown started, customers were running, helter skelter to start their production. There was challenge with people are not coming. There are a lot of challenge, but now when customers are ramping up their production, we see an increase there. But it's completely divided into two parts. In south and west, the disruption is less. South and east. By east, I mean primarily Sikkim and Guwahati, which are the farmer hubs. So in south and east, the disruption is less. More the companies are working more than 50% capacity. Some of them are working even at 70-80% capacity. The demand for service is very, very high. But at the same time, in north and west, not especially because the pharma industry is concentrated in but the surrounding four states, and every state has its own policy. There's a people's movement, logistics is a challenge. So production generally is hugely disrupted there. And also on the western India, the two biggest impacted state for COVID-19 is Maharashtra and Gujarat. So north and west, there is a challenge. The demand for service is less, but for in south and east, the demand for service is very, very high. Now, coming to this is the answer of your first question. Coming to your next question, for oral solid dosage, fortunately, the Indian pharma industry, has a huge dependence on ACG. So ACG has a large responsibility there. So what we realized a few years back, that firstly, we have this responsibility of making sure that whatever disruption happens, pharma industry is up and running. But we also have another responsibility that our product compete with the best in the world. So a few years back, we realized that if we have to compete in the best in the world, Europe generally has very good back-end supply chain, which we don't have, unfortunately, in India. We don't have that quality of vendors. So ACG about 10 years back hugely invested in making a facility in Shirwal for component manufacturing. It's a state-of-the-art facility with the very, very high-speed, high-end machines from Japan and Germany. And probably it is the biggest facility for component manufacturing in Asia. So where we are supplying parts to the group for our products, all our products, including our capsule plants. So this is making sure that the supply chain is not interrupted. Also, at the same time, this plant, as well as our capsule packaging machine and our machinery plants, are following the same safety norms, because from one side, the safety our associate is paramount to us, and the second side, we want to make sure that none of our factories become a contained zone where we are unable to supply to industry. So we are following all norms. We are doing antiviral fogging of our buses, our facilities. We are providing people with all the PPEs. We are maintaining social distancing in the plant. We are making sure that our plant facility zones are isolated. Each zone is isolated so that in the plants also, if one zone is impacted, the entire plant or somebody gets infected, the entire plant does not become contained. Also, we have gone back to our strategic suppliers. We do have suppliers globally. We are working with them very closely. We have a very efficient supply chain, and it's my pleasure to inform all of you, this group of people, that last month we have been most of the customers who have wanted products or services from us have got it. So that's the answer of your question.
Okay, that was really comprehensive. Let me just get back to Mr. D'Souza. I think the line's fine now. If you can,
Yeah.
just we can just connect on where we left off on the reset in manufacturing, whether it's happening in, say, in the US and Europe, and whether companies there are kind of looking at sourcing locally, or backward expansion where they're owning a excipient site. Can you give us some insights into that as well?
I would say resetting not really, because all leading excipient manufacturers have their dual manufacturing facilities in different continents as a part of its mitigation. Depending upon countries which are affected, some minor resetting might be there, but not to the scale and extent as to what the other sections are. Back home, I feel the local excipient industry or the local excipient manufacturers, they are heavily dependent on China, and yes, they could be impacted. But I think here, as a bridge, in order that companies get timely material, companies like us, like Signet and many others who are into the excipient distributing space, come in come in as sort of a savior. I would say all of us, we have material with us which is there in our stocks for 2 to 3 months, and here is where we act as an extended arm.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. D'Souza. If I can now move to Mr. Atish Majumdar of Mankind. Mankind, as you know, is ranked among the top five companies and is quite known for some of its disruptive strategies. So, Mr. Majumdar, can you indicate broadly how the demand supply scenario has shaped in India for medicines with amid COVID-19 and the lockdown? Because data from the market research agency AIOCD suggests that March was a pretty decent month with 8.9% growth. And we have some evidence that there has been some panic buying of chronic medicines. Could you share with us how the month of April has been overall, in general, for the sector? And has the demand supply scenario been more or less manageable for industry? And also some sense on the industry level inventories at distributors. Are we comfortably placed? Over to you, Mr. Majumdar.
Yeah, good morning. A very good morning to all of you. And it's a long question. Huh? Let me start with February. In the month of February, the industry witnessed a growth of around 14.5% IMS. This is IMS data I give you. Then in March, we saw a growth of 5%. AVAX showed a higher growth. Both of these was in the midst of an unprecedented scenario, an unprecedented reality which we were going through. So in the month of February, what we saw essentially was panic buying. People were buying thinking that stocks or medicines are not going to be available. Whereas in March, we saw different customer psychology present itself. We saw, we kind of saw a new line of inventory holding opening up. Now, pharma, for all practical purposes, has always been a function of inflated demand. So we have three layers in the supply chain: stockists, CNFs, stockists, and retailers, and in certain cases, sub-stockists. But the COVID thing threw up a new stock line. A new line opened up, which was the patient. He normally used to stock about 15 days, 21 days, but this coronavirus crisis led to a higher stocking at the patient level. And this again showed in the sales in the month of March. Now, coming to April, uh, the way we are seeing it, I think the patient realizes that this is the new reality and will have to live with this. And the fact that the supply chain has been managed extremely well by all stakeholders. I think everybody has done their bit, right from the factory to the distribution people, and and this has kind of passed on to the patient. There were challenges, like every industry has faced. We have faced our share of challenges, but I think we have done an admirable job in catering to the patient's needs. So coming to April, yes, we have seen a lower offtake right through the month. The audited data is still not available, but broadly, which we have been monitoring through AVAX, is that about 81% offtake as compared to March. Broadly, that would, in my understanding, lead to a April 19 to April 20 scene. It would lead to a regrowth of 6 to 8% somewhere. Yeah, but the other side of the story is this is very incidental April month, because what Corona has ultimately done is transformed two big industries. Digital transformation here to stay, but more than that, I think health awareness, the value for life, has drastically gone up. The kind of advertisement Corona has done for health, I don't think the industry would have ever achieved that. So going ahead, I expect a greater awareness, greater leaning in towards wellness, and a greater leaning in towards taking care of oneself, and that should.
Pharmaceutical industry. So please allow it to operate for this particular product.
Sorry.
May I request the speakers, the panelists, to just unmute, or mute your line when you're not speaking, if possible, please, because it's carried forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, please continue, Mr. Majumdar.
Okay. So this is so going forward, I see growth coming back in the industry, and we should finish with the positive for the year. Now, coming to inventory patterns, if you look at our inventories in 2018 for the industry, the overall inventory day holding was 44.9, right? Currently, and in 19, it came to around 45 days. Currently, for the month of April, we have a holding of 43 days, which has come up from 33 days in March. That's a movement of 10 days. I think uh, in anti-infectives, we are pretty well stocked. We have stocks up to 71 days as per the UX data. Cardio diabetes also we have seen in inventory days going up in the market. So all in all, I think we are pretty well stocked to serve the market. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. Some great insights and forward-looking assessment. And I think the bottom line is that we are in good hands with the pharmaceutical industry in India.
Oh, I firmly believe so.
So, right. Okay. So we've touched upon various aspects from, say, manufacturing, the API part of it, to excipients, to the machinery and technical aspects, and to the formulations and market situation from Mr. Majumdar. Let's now move to the R&D part and amid the prospects of safer treatments and a vaccine. So we have with us Dr. Chetan Doshi of USV. Let me begin by asking Dr. Doshi on his very broad top line assessment on the repurposed potential COVID-19 treatments that we are hearing about, remdesivir, HCQ, favipiravir, based on emerging data and ongoing studies. Just recently we heard, on Friday we heard that the FDA had given EUA, emergency use authorization, for remdesivir for hospitalized severe COVID-19 patients. What is your overall sense on this? Are we being overly optimistic? If you can give us a broad sense, and then we can touch upon the vaccines part. Over to you, Dr. Doshi.
Yeah, good morning, all the participants, panelists, as well as Informa. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Coming back to your question about repurposing the drugs that are already available, what I see in the clinical trials or the patients are being treated with HCQ, azithromycin. These are main two lines of treatment to begin with when the patients have mild to moderate symptoms. Uh, Addition of antiretroviral like remdesivir or favipiravir or even Tamiflu, oseltamivir is added if the patients are experiencing more severe symptoms. So depending on the disease condition and when the patient gets diagnosed with COVID-19, the treatments are going to vary, but there is a lot of uh, promise in these treatments, particularly macrolide antibiotic, chloroquine containing medicine, and antiretroviral viral combinations are first line of treatment, along with certain vitamin supplements, particularly zinc and copper vitamin supplements are also being used to treat these patients. So there is a lot of hope that these treatments will come through and the patients are recovering faster. Uh, Remdesivir, as such, is being only allowed or being allowed to be used only for the more severe cases right now, and so we still have the jury out waiting. What is going to be the final treatment, and as I see, there is going to be a series of treatments depending on the patient condition. It's not going to be one set fixing all the patient.
Okay, so that's pretty encouraging. But we also have some very interesting developments around the vaccines front. WHO data says that we have almost 70 plus vaccines in preclinical evaluation and 5 or 6 in clinical evaluation. We've heard some very interesting news on the Oxford vaccine with Serum in the forefront. We've also had some news recently of Pfizer with the mRNA based vaccine. And these are, very aggressive timelines we are talking of: September readiness and October readiness. How optimistic are you of, these kind of timelines? And do you believe that, we need to kind of temper the enthusiasm a bit? Dr. Doshi?
Uh, I think there are a lot of companies as well as academias working on vaccine development, and the entire globe and world is fighting against this pandemic. So definitely, there is a lot of enthusiasm. There is a lot of urgency also to save lives, and so I think we don't need to temper down the enthusiasm that we have. It's going to continue, but to be more realistic, as we have seen with remdesivir, only emergency use is allowed. Some of these vaccines, there are 6 or 7 different approaches being used to develop vaccines. Neither one of them is, completely proven to be safe right now. So and a typical vaccine development takes somewhere between 2 years to 5 years. So let's hope that, somewhere around September to October timeframe this year, we may have first uh, clue of a suitable vaccine to be tested in human beings. It may be allowed to be used only under strict supervision. And however, to develop a vaccine for the masses, it's probably going to take about 18 months to 2 years. That's a very optimistic scenario. And on the outer line, it can take about 5 years to be both safe and effective.
Absolutely. One of the experts just said that, making a COVID vaccine currently is like flying the plane and making it alongside. So I guess that's the kind of situation we are in. So before I get back to Dr. Dua with an important question, I'd just like to inform all participants that we have 1,700 and counting participants on our webinar, which is a good
Wow.
record. And so thank you all participants. Thank you for the support. And I think this is also a good time to, let me get the second poll question rolling. Again, participants, you have 30 seconds to share your opinion and then keep an eye on the screen to see which way the wind is blowing. Okay. Thank you. Let me get back to Dr. Dua. Um, Dr. Dua, we've touched upon the API part of it, and you've given us some great insights. But if I touch upon the manufacturing bit, given the complexities of logistics, how people movement has been affected, but the Daman are kind of tricky areas currently. How are firms balancing business continuity and employee safety there? Over to you, Dr. Dua.
No, thank you, Anju. It's a very relevant and pertinent question. You see, immediately after the lockdown, after the 25th, the capacity utilization across the board plummeted to absolute low of 20-25%. And there was no clarity at all. There were notifications coming in from Ministry of Home Affairs and then clarifications by the state governments. And it was ironical that all these notifications were being interpreted uniformly across the board, even the road, as well as entering into a particular state where your manufacturing facility is located. Just to give you an example, Haryana was blocking everything. Whilst the material was coming to our factory in Derabasi, huge campus, 120 acres, we were being blocked for a couple of days because they had no clarity at all. And then once you move out of Haryana into Punjab, there was no problem because Punjab cops knew Nectar Life Sciences very well. So we had a smooth run, right? And then gradually working with the additional chief secretary of Punjab, Mrs. Winnie Mahajan, we could sail through smoothly. Look at on the contrary side in the south, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, biggest facilitator governments in the country. And there, the capacity utilization right from the word go was close to about 40%. And currently in Punjab, for example, in our campus, we have a capacity utilization and the likes of us over there is about 60-65%. Government is understanding. But even now in certain states like Himachal Pradesh, as I speak today, both my factories are running, formulation factories are running at hardly about 30% because the highly skilled and talented people who run the show are not being allowed to enter. And there is a precondition that in case you let them in, you make them stay forever till such time the lockdown is taken off. There are no good hotels. It's a godforsaken place. In the factory, we cannot accommodate 100 plus people or thereabouts. So there are issues. Secondly, there is a manpower movement issue as well, from one state to another. Initially, we got the permission from Haryana into Punjab. Thereafter, we didn't. Telangana AP, as I hear from 3,500 companies or from Excel, is that they were smooth, generally speaking, smooth. District to district, state to state, everything was smoothened out in about 15, 20 days' time. So there was a big constraint initially. Now the capacity has come up to about 60%. But for it to go up to 70, 80% pre-COVID level, what you need to do is to settle out JNPT. JNPT is not operating at more than 20%. 60% of the cargo, incoming and outgoing, is being handled by JNPT. They don't have the requisite staff. The entire cargo, essential pharmaceutical cargo and non-pharmaceutical cargo, is jumbled up completely. Nobody knows. Our people have to go inside, check which one is my container and take it out. It takes days, not hours, it takes days. Labor is not available, absolutely non-existent. So we are getting labor from the village, trying to work through the police, getting them infrared, getting them to sanitize themselves and move in, spend huge amount of money. Customs, the third part is customs. Only 20% staff is available in spite of taking it up with the government at the ministerial level. And they too are ill-equipped to handle clearances. So they speak to their highly skilled people, they speak to their seniors, and again, it takes hours and days to make sure that the cargoes are cleared. So need of the hour today, to answer the question straight, is that you straighten JNPT. For example, the inland container in Delhi is working very efficiently at about 56%. We're able to clear everything very efficiently. So why not JNPT, right? So that being the case, if we want to reach up to a level of 70, 80% in pharmaceuticals, particularly APIs, you need to unshackle wherever the problems are. And be on top of it right now, concurrently, there is a VC going on with the Department of Pharmaceuticals, Honorable Secretary, and I'm trying to listen to what solutions are emerging. So that's what it is as of now today, Anju.
Okay, thanks. So obviously there are some bottlenecks, but hopefully a kind of concerted effort is already addressing some of this. If I can just get Mr. D'Souza back into the conversation, in general, could you give us your broad outlook for the excipient segment? And more recently we saw companies like Reform Biologics and Millipore Sigma announce a licensing agreement for excipient development and commercialization, indicating that more and more people are probably looking at owning excipient manufacturing or having their own kind of setup for it. If you can give us your broad outlook for the excipient segment in India and in general, please. Over to you, Mr. D'Souza.
I would say the global excipient industry is approximately 8.5 billion, out of which APAC is 2.2 billion, and Indian excipient industry is about 0.5 million. Among all the countries, APAC is growing at a faster pace, and among APAC, India has the largest or the highest percentile of growth, almost like 10%. So I would say excipient industry in India, there's always it's a sunshine. There's sunshine there. Health consciousness is increasing. Sanitization seriousness is getting to the minds of many. Government is also trying to reach out to a maximum larger pool population, and globally also a lot of countries are dependent on Indian formulations. So given all these conditions and taking into account that formulations would grow in India, and so will be excipient. As more and more formulations are made, more and more excipients will be required. More focus also on functional excipients, because people are all formulation companies are also trying to make high-end formulations. So overall, to answer your question in brief, I would say excipient industry has a brighter future.
Okay, great. I like the bit on the sunshine, and I hope this sunshine, kind of spreads across industry and probably also across, takes part of COVID away as well. Let me stick with the outlook bit and get Mr. Shankar Gupta back into the conversation. What is the current outlook and what are the kind of prospects you see for engineering products and services? And, sticking to the sunshine as well, has COVID-19 also spurred any innovation across ACG? Mr. Gupta?
Yeah. I'll address the innovation part first. ACG's new tagline says "Make it better." So we can't make it better without doing innovation. So I'll talk about there are two types of innovation. One is short term and one is long term. In short term, we have started complete online support to our customers because we can't go to all customers. We have a software called TeamView where with customers' consent, we take access of our products and we get the real-time data. We find out the error, bugs, and support customer in resolving issues. And we've been very successful in resolving many issues with our customer. The second part is the INC, installation and commissioning our products, because when you supply it needs to be done. So we are doing through video, through Skype, and it's my pleasure to inform that we have been able to do at least 10 to 12 installation in India and about 10 overseas, especially in Brazil, where our engineer sits in Sao Paulo and the factories are very far off, so across the globe. So that's the short-term innovation that we have been doing. But on a long term, the one area we are focusing on is Industry 4.0 for doing predictive, preventive, and prescriptive maintenance. That as we compete with the best in the world, but when you ask someone that which machines or which equipments are the best in the world, they would say European design, because there they have some edge. But where India has an edge is other than pharma, there is one industry dominating in the world is IT. So we want to leverage the India's IT to get that, get a leadership position in the industry. So what we are doing is that, normally IoT, what it does is that it gives the metric-based data to dashboard setup to access real-time mobile KPIs to customers. So for a guy who is in manufacturing, it helps in streamlining processes, enhancing efficiencies, eliminating waste. And a guy who is in engineering or in maintenance, it helps in avoid breakdown, plant maintenance, and getting rid of the inventory, excess inventory, and getting the spare. So what it does at the end, one thing is COVID-19 is going to do for across industries, and pharma is no exception, is to drive efficiency.
I think we are having a bit of a technical difficulty with. Yeah, I think we're having a bit of a technical difficulty with Mr. Gupta's audio. Yeah. So let me just quickly move back to Mr. Atish Majumdar. COVID-19 has also made digital initiatives the new normal, and with the movement of MRs and Salesforce restricted, are most companies using digital means to reach out to doctors, and has this effort been well received by physicians? I mean, are we in a position to say that digital is the new normal for pharma marketing? Mr. Majumdar?
Okay. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are. Thank you.
Okay. I think it is the new normal during the COVID times. Post-COVID is a different story, but let's stick to the COVID. During this COVID crisis, yes, I think there are two access issues broadly the industry faced. One was the lack of access to the physicians, which our field force normally go and meet and promote their products. That was the big challenge. And the second was doctors were not being able to meet their patients, right? That was another access issue which we were facing. And one side is the responsibility of seeing that the field force goes and interacts with the doctor, by virtue of which you promote your products and propositions. But on the other side is also a responsibility to see that patients who are on your drugs get that awareness, get that education regarding how to navigate this situation. So yes, pharma was a bit slow to start. In the first week of April, IQVIA did a study and found that 36% of doctors had not been contacted by pharma. And this was done for 4 days up to 5th April. And the same survey also spoke about nearly 80% doctors wanting to be connected by pharma. So yes, I think digital has been the way during the COVID times, and we have seen webinars, educational webinars, information webinars regarding various facets of a doctor and healthcare professional's role. And I think as mankind, we have been pretty active on that front also. But going forward, I think digital connection with the customer will stay. It is there to stay. I think the salience will go up. And the one thing which also got introduced during this phase was teleconsultation, which has made penetration of around 12 to 15% so far. I think this will also stay, but personal meeting of the doctors, I don't think that's going to change. But yes, virtual interactions, meeting doctors virtually, and communicating science through this medium. I think all this are going to stay simply because of the reach factor and the easiness of doing things.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Majumdar. I think we're still having a bit of a problem with Mr. Gupta's line. So, if I can just, pose another question to you. Does industry require any additional support from government to sustain supplies in these challenging times? And if you can share any broad trends on which are the specific segments where we've seen a huge surge in demand.
Okay, answering your first question, supply chain, yes, everything and anything by the government will be really, really welcome. I think what the government needs to do today is to treat medicines on a strategic platform like you would treat weapons. The war is today being played out in the hospitals, and the soldiers, the heroes, the doctors requires these weapons to fight the disease. So yes, any a change in approach by the government would be tremendously welcome. And I must say, the fact that they passed the act regarding violence to doctors is a very, very welcome news for the industry. Very, very welcome. You need your customers to be respected. They were always heroes for us for always. But having the government do that, that brings in a lot of cheer to the entire fraternity. Yeah, that's one part of it. The second is any financial benefit in terms of imports and reducing duties would be definitely welcome, because somebody.
Can I request, I think it's Dr. Gua's line. Can I request him to please mute the, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Majumdar, please continue. Sorry for that.
Yeah. So yeah, that will be very, very welcome. Any support on that front would be very welcome. The second part of your question, can you repeat that? Sorry, I lost that.
Yes, it is about any trends in increased supplies in specific
Okay,
segments
okay,
in the
okay.
domestic market, right?
See, what happens is corona by itself, the virus, is contagious, but it becomes fatal when it grows on a bed of chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, malignancy, anything that lowers immunity. And because of that, people have to maintain their BP levels, their sugar levels, have to see that they are properly immunized. So, what is happening is cardiology, diabetes drugs, even respiratory drugs, we have seen attraction in the market, and the uptake has been very good, especially in cardiology and diabetes, because obviously in both these segments, the awareness is the highest. And we've also seen attraction in oncology. So yes, these are the four segments which has seen perhaps a greater awareness, but more than that, has seen a greater purchase of medicines taking place.
Okay, I really like the bit you said that the war is actually being played out in hospitals. So it's good that the government is cognizant of that and has taken some decisive measures. If I can just rewind and touch upon the digital bit again and pose this question to Dr. Chetan Doshi. How has COVID impacted clinical trials in India? Are companies relying on risk-based monitoring using digital technology? And overall, do you see the coronavirus pandemic triggering some long-lasting changes in R&D in terms of R&D budgets, in terms of focus areas? Just a broad take on that, Dr. Doshi.
Sure, Anju. So, as far as the clinical trials are concerned, in Western world, clinical trials are not being impacted. They are using telemedicine and they are going on. Of course, at a slower pace as compared to earlier pace. As far as India is concerned, I think the clinical research organization associations are still working out guidelines in terms of how to restart clinical trials, and a lot depend. And they are in, as far as I understand, they are in talks with government and governmental agencies about how to start this. ICMR and others need to give them approval for this. It will also depend on where the CRO is located. What was their, you know, volunteer base? Are they in red zone? Are they in a green zone? Are they in orange zone? So that's going to, you know, change the scenarios for each CROs. Uh, Probably a large portion of studies, I mean, when we talk about clinical trials, we know that remdesivir, favipiravir, all those clinical trials are still being continued with government authorization. So it will also depend on type of drug that for which the clinical trial is being sought for. And for certain drugs, it might be allowed, and there might be patient population available for that. Uh, Also, there is a portion of bioequivalence studies, and I think there is the organizations are struggling for that in terms of a bioequivalence studies. So they will also most, and coming back to your question on R&D, the investment trends and future trends. Uh, Depending on, if we consider a scenario where COVID situation is taken care of in next 2 to 3 months, I think there will be a very little impact on R&D spending, and it will surge back quickly. However, most realistic scenario is that this is going to be with us till December or so. In that scenario, most of capital expense and the capital projects will be put back. uh, Only so expansion projects will be put back, but at the same time there will be investment in R&D to digitize things so that the analyst working on HPLC or someone else can work from home and be a contributor in the R&D or as well as company's growth. Um, Operational budgets will definitely be relooked at. Projects will be reprioritized depending on which scenario plays out. Most of the companies, if I understand correctly, are looking at a medium term scenario where things will be till December. So there is definitely going to be an impact in operational budget. How each company manages it is up to that company. Whether they look at the manpower part of it, or they look at the project part of it and adjust it.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Doshi. Do we have, yes, Mr. Gupta is back on the line. So if we can kind of take off from where we left, Mr. Gupta, you were telling us about some of the interesting aspects of innovation at ACG. If you can quickly recap and share with us those insights,
Yeah,
please,
I was.
Mr. Gupta.
Yeah, yeah. On the long term, as I was mentioning, that we are focusing hugely on IIoT on the operation side, streamlining the manufacturing processes, enhancing the efficiencies, and eliminating waste. And on the engineering side, the planned maintenance, avoiding breakdowns, and avoiding spare part inventory. One thing that COVID-19 is going to do for across industries is driving efficiencies. Every organization will look at put their cost base down. So as we were doing the innovation at X speed,
Mr. Gupta, I think there is some problem with your line. The cell phone is buzzing. Yeah.
yeah. So there is there is a huge level of interest in the industry to partner with us on IoT. So that's the,
I think we're still having a
before
bit of a
that, the
difficulty.
greenfield projects we are
Yeah,
seeing
please
that they
go
are
ahead.
getting postponed.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Postponed. The existing projects continue, and immediate opportunities postponed. The existing projects continue, and there are some immediate opportunities. But also there are some being at ACG. There is a that when we look at holistically to the industry, there are some indications that Indian pharma is providing a huge part of Indian pharma is dependent on exports to US.
I think there is a bit of a disturbance still, Mr. Gupta. I think yes.
Sorry. So now what? Yeah, there's no disturbance. I'll continue. If I'm able to hear me now. So in Indian pharma is hugely dependent on exports to US for their margins and volume. And healthcare is a big issue there. Indian pharma is hugely dependent on exports to US for their margins and volume.
I'm sorry, I think I will interrupt you a bit.
There's a huge realization
there is a bit of
they have to provide.
Okay, I think we are having a technical issue with Mr. Gupta's line. So let me bring Mr. Dua, Dr. Dua back into the conversation. Dr. Dua, is Dr. Dua online yet? Okay. In the meanwhile, I mean, sticking with the feel-good kind of scenario, if I can just quickly move to Mr. Majumdar while we get Dr. Dua back. Mr. Majumdar, if you can share what is your general outlook for the next, say, immediate couple of months in terms of the supply scenario and also some of the exports that could come India's way. Just a broad sense of it while we get Dr. Dua back on the call.
Okay, as far as my outlook goes, I think, like I told you earlier, I have a firm belief that the whole Corona incident, what it is essentially doing, is creating a huge amount of health awareness. So I think going forward, the demands will go up. But there are some caveats here. And in our industry, especially in the chronic segment, we bifurcate a patient into three parts. People who start early their treatment of the disease. There are people who start timely, and there are people who start late. Right now, when you don't have patients coming into the clinics for 30 days, there is a long-term consequence of delaying treatment, delaying diagnostics. So that will be an immediate outcome which we'll see as we go along, right? But post-COVID, I think the challenge will be really to create access to physicians for the field force. For the physicians, it would be to manage the patient load that they are going to get. And in terms of supply chain, if we get our API in place, and if the production happens as far as the API supply goes, if we get it on time, I think we don't see a big challenge on that front. But yes, we do see challenges on the patient-doctor interaction, because one has to practice social distancing. We have to live with Corona. It's our reality now. So what a doctor used to do in 15 minutes, perhaps he can do in more than an hour now. So broadly, but having said that, like I said, my whenever I look into the next 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, I think I am very optimistic that especially pharma will do extremely well because of one single thing: the value of life has gone up. I mean, I could have never ever imagined that life would get postponed this way. When you look at the streets, it is desolate. There's nobody there, and people have stayed at home. And while they have stayed at home, they have really not cared for other things. Like what is going to happen to my job, my economy, and everything. They've just looked at one thing: their health, their body, and life overall. And that always augurs well for the pharma industry, because that's our goal. Look after your health.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Majumdar. I think we've just lost Dr. Dua for a bit, but I think he should be back with us shortly. But if I can just kind of, those were some really interesting insights around the nitty-gritties across the pharma spectrum. And now, since we are kind of close to our closing time, I'd like to open the webinar to Q&A. I will direct the questions to the concerned panelist, and then if you can, address these questions briefly and more or less within the time limit, so that we can accommodate as many questions as possible. Let me begin by asking the first question. This is a question specifically to Dr. Doshi. Dr. Doshi, could you please give us your insights on the development of drugs for such epidemics? And it's been over 4 months since the infection has kind of got momentum, and it will take another 3 to 4 months by the time the number of people will also go up. So do you think the drug development norms need to be a little relaxed in this scenario to foster more R&D? That's a question for Dr. Doshi.
So the pandemic itself has, stimulated drug development as such, particularly in biotechnology and in vaccines area. There is a lot of work being done in terms of identifying, targets and addressing those targets to find this treatment. Uh, when it comes to the small molecules, I think there's a lot of emphasis being put on repurposing drug, and there are a lot of articles out there. And, each academy, each institute and each corporation is focusing on certain areas. We hear about famotidine in Chinese elderly patient able to survive, make them survive COVID infections or have a better outcome of that infection. And so in small molecule area, there is immediate attention is a lot more on repurposing the drug rather than inventing a new molecule or a new, because it's going to take time. uh, should the norms be relaxed? Norms be relaxed only for a particular disease condition, which is, having a huge impact on the humanity and lives world over. However, there is a set process in terms of developing drug product, which we have to adhere to. If we start relaxing that, then uh, it's going to compromise on the safety of human beings. Can things process be improved? Probably process will be improved as a learning out coming out of this, and many regulatory agencies will take a retro look, and even corporations will take a retro look and try to see what can be improved later on. And we still have to wait for another year to see those changes.
What is the kind of impact you see on 2021 growth of the pharmaceutical industry in the backdrop of COVID-19?
Anju, that was that question for me?
Yes, Mr. Majumdar, that was for you.
Okay. For 2021, my understanding is looking at all the variables, both fixed and variable. I think we would grow somewhere around 3 to 5%.
Okay. And if I can also, put another question to, just a minute, the question queue is, I think, quite full here. Okay, I think this is a question for Mr. Shankar Gupta. What is the effect or impact on new or brownfield projects that we are seeing in the backdrop of COVID-19?
Yeah, I was, I couldn't answer my last question completely. So I'll just add that customers are more looking now at driving
I couldn't
efficiency.
answer my last question completely, so I'll just add that customers are more looking now at driving
I
couldn't answer my last question completely, so I'll just add that customers are more looking now
efficiency. So
there is a problem with. I think there's a problem with Mr. Gupta's line. I think, Mr. Gupta, you need to just shut down other devices in the vicinity if it's possible. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we have Dr. Dua back with us, but if I can just pose a question to I think I'll just pose this question in general, to all the panelists in terms of new employment across your sectors. So I'll begin with Mr. D'Souza, then move to Dr. Doshi, and then to Mr. Majumdar, and then to Mr. Gupta. What is the kind of impact you see COVID-19 having on employment or intake of new employees or retaining of existing employees? Let me begin with Mr. D'Souza.
Yeah, I feel that what COVID has taught us, and that's what Mr. Dr. Dua had also said, is how successful is working from home. I think the digital platform nowadays has shown us the new ways of working. So, according to me, and of course, as an organization, we are a very lean organization. According to me, I would say there will be no impact on retaining of the people, but there would be definitely
I think we're having some tricky lines today. Monday morning blues for the lines, I guess. Yeah, I think you're back, Mr. D'Souza. I think you're back. If you, no, I'm sorry. Okay, if I can move on to Dr. Doshi, if you can, in the meantime, share views on what you see is the fallout on employment because of COVID, especially in the R&D segment. Would you see more
So,
opportunities for R&D guys?
so most of the companies are, trying to maintain their employment level at the current level uh, right now. If there are if there are vacancies, they will wait and watch unless there's a critical vacancy. They will not be filled. On the other hand, there are so many other companies who are, trying to do research on COVID-19. So there are a lot more opportunities in those organizations. They might be small, medium organization, and they might be, supporting the main research. So there might be a lot more job opportunities in that area. So overall, I don't see an immediate negative impact in R&D in terms of job opportunity. Only each company will go through their own requirements critically, and then they will decide whether they can defer or they really need that person on board. Till this COVID-19 situation is under control to a great extent.
Okay. Do we have Mr. D'Souza back? No, I think it's still an issue. So if if Mr. Majumdar can take on the same question in terms of number of employees, and also there is a related question whether digitization will mean fewer MRs on the field, or are we looking at upskilling the existing MRs? Some kind of view on that as well.
Okay, I think as far as employment goes, the strategy is to retain first and hold on to the current talent that is there and evaluate vacancies very critically. And post the lockdown happens, then see how the economy is shaping up. Based on that, take strategic decisions whether we want to expand or you just want to stay where you are. But this is something which is being done real time. I think in every company, people are critically evaluating, asking themselves the question, do they really need to use the resources at this point of time? See, there's one thing that you do when you see a recession happening is you basically try to reduce wastage as much as possible. I think that would be the approach most companies would be taking. We are going to do that for sure. Now, coming to whether digitalization will lead to a reduction in jobs, no. I think digitalization leads to customization, right? You start preparing strategies for a person individually, right? It gives you that level of individuality to all your strategies. So going forward, you would need someone to really do that bridging. That physical bridging is also important. So digitalization, at least in the doctor company interface, which is the sales reps and the field, I don't see it getting reduced. In the near term, which is next 3-4 years, I really don't see that getting reduced.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. We'll take another shot at Mr. Gupta's line. Mr. Gupta, can you hear me? Okay. So if you
Yes,
can share with
yes.
us, yeah, if you can share with us your views on, what it may mean for employment and employees during COVID-19 in terms of intake
Yeah,
or redundancies.
I was mentioning that Indian pharma is hugely dependent on export to USA and even
I'm
all
sorry.
industry.
I think we'll have to. Uh, no,
Yeah,
Mr. Gupta, I'm sorry. I think there's a heavy echo. So let me just get Mr. D'Souza back into the conversation quickly for what he sees are the issues on the employment front.
Well, as I mentioned, I do not feel that there is a problem about retention of people. COVID-19 has taught us to work much more effectively, make independent decisions. And all I can say is that, to answer your question, will there be a question mark to new employment? I would say no. In fact, things will become, the things will become much more sharper and independent way of working.
Okay, I think that's a good positive to kind of sum up the entire session. We've had some great insights and some really interesting, smart questions. I'm sure we have, several questions more, but some of these, paucity of time, will need to be addressed offline. With that, let me just sum up the webinar. If I can just say, clearly COVID-19 has thrown up significant challenges and, employees, various stakeholders, the government, all will need to put in a concerted and coordinated effort to sustain momentum in the pharmaceutical industry. The risk reward aspects will need to be balanced and viewed very carefully, as will the cost related aspects. So we had a great session and we expect to keep more of these rolling in future. With that, I'd like to hand over back to Rahul, but just a reminder and a fervent request to all our participants to take a few minutes for our survey at the end. Give us some feedback. We'd like to improve, we'd like to make it better, and we'd like to take you along with all our experts. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Anju. Before we conclude, I just wanted.
Whoops, I think Rahul, we can't hear you. Please bear with us for a minute. Rahul is just getting back on the system. Um, yeah, sorry for that basic, disruption. While we wait for Rahul, I think we just like to thank all our 1700 plus participants for being so patient with us, despite some of these technical hitches. But as they say, content is king, and we've had some of the best speakers share their views on the nitty gritties in the segment. And this is an industry that's here to stay, here to grow, and pandemics will make us stronger and probably give us more opportunities. I think we have Chetna online. If Chetna would, like to just sum up the session.
Yes, so we would just like to sum it up by saying that, as we come to the end of the insightful and the enriching webinar, we would like to thank all the esteemed speakers, the moderator, and the wonderful audience, which is about 1700 plus audience, which supported us in making this webinar, the COVID-19 Impact on the Indian Pharma Industry, a great success. We will be delighted to welcome you again for many such intriguing webinars under the Informa Markets India Pharma eConnect digital platform. Till then, stay safe and stay home. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.